Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Don Johnston, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today, and then we want to talk about these 4 amazing books that you've written.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to telling this story, and I appreciate you letting me do it. Well, I was born in 1936, so the math says I'm 88, and actually I'm still in good health. I work in my yard and all that kind of stuff if I want to. But back to the beginning, I was born in the piney woods of East Texas in a small town. The town's called Slocum. You wouldn't know about it unless you'd been there because it only has 200 people. In fact, I wasn't even born in the town. I was born right on the edge of it. But it is the edge of the piney woods. And it has, virgin pines are 100 feet high. It has small streams and bigger streams and rivers and some lakes and some rolling hills. It's a beautiful place, and there was an advantage of growing up in a rural place like that, but there was a disadvantage too. It was a poor place. Most of the people there were still farmers, and they were about one generation removed from the 40 acres and a mule type of farming. And both of my grandfathers were farmers, and one of them, my granddad Johnston, was in fact a sharecropper. So we grew up poor. My dad worked for the Texas Forest Service, so that was a more regular income than farming. And we said when we were kids, we said he worked for Smokey the Bear. You remember that Smokey the Bear prevent forest fires and that type of thing. And so, we probably ate better than royalty because we had a big garden and that kind of thing. My mother canned it at first and then froze it in later years. So we ate well, and we had a lot of fun living outside. My sister was a year and a half older than me. My brother was 3.5 years older. Mike, they both died this year. So I am the last of those siblings. But we had a lot of fun growing up there, growing up in a rural area. I mean, we climbed trees and even swam in some of the streams, and we jumped off of barns and fished. And that place in the spring was as pretty as you ever saw. A lot of dogwoods, redbuds, and that kind of thing. So pretty place, but I knew I was going to have to leave because I had to make a living. You've heard people speak of a butterfly effect. A lot of people have it different, that kind of idea, but in case your audience, all of them don't know, and some of them might not, it's some small event has a great effect somewhere else. Actually, I think the idea originally was a butterfly might flap his wings here in Sugar Land and it have some effect in New York. Well, I think of it too as something happens at one time and later on comes back. So I had what I would call a butterfly effect when I was 5 years old. I believe it drew me into the world of science. Of course, I was too young and naive to know that. But anyway, here's the deal. We had moved to a different house, and as we were moving in, my sister, I was 5, so my sister was a year and a half older. My brother was too young to participate in this, but she and I immediately started a treasure hunt. We wanted to see previous occupants had left anything that was worth finding. So we ducked in the first closet, and it had nothing but some tangled coat hangers and that kind of thing. And we went to the second closet. It was the same thing. And but when we came to the third closet, we found a treasure. There was a book lying on the floor, and I pounced on it before my sister, so I claimed that it was mine. And I later found out it was about a fifth grade science book, and the first 10 or 12 pages had been torn out, but the first visible page, it was bright colors. It was a beautiful monarch butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, and I did still believe that was an aha moment that made me take up the study of science years later when I started college. So it was a true butterfly effect. Now, when I graduated from high school, incidentally, I said the town was small. There was 222 kids in school the year I graduated, and that's from grade 1 through grade 12. So you have about 18 kids in each grade. Very small school. When I graduated, I joined the Air Force for 4 years. I graduated in 1954, and when I turned 18 that September, I joined the Air Force. My parents knew I wanted to do it, and they would have signed for me if I wanted them to, but I just waited. And I did it for 2 reasons. Number one, they did not have the money to send me to college, and so I would have had to borrow money. And number two, there was sort of the draft was sort of hanging over my shoulders, and I said, I might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I said, I'll join the Air Force, get rid of my military service, and then I'll go to school on the GI Bill. So, and that is exactly what I did. So after my basic training in San Antonio, and I had tech school in Chanute Air Force Base in Southern Illinois, I ended up at the Panama Canal, and I loved that place. I spent my whole 3.5 years. I was enlisted for 4 years, so I spent the last 3.5 years in Panama. I could have left after 2.5, but I didn't want to get assigned to another base someplace. And also, if you recall, the Vietnam War started in 55, but I was already in fall of November, I believe, I was already established in Panama. And now my skill and my training in the Air Force was jungle survival. I was instructor for jungle survival. I was not on flying status, but I taught people who were on flying status. And down there in South and Central America, if a plane crashed, you either crashed in the water or in the jungle. There was nothing else that no other place you wouldn't have found a landing strip. So I was training people who are on flying status in jungle survival, and it was easy down there. There were some snakes and things like that. I have friends that talk about being in Vietnam, and they had jungle survival. I said, well, there's a big difference. I said, it wasn't anybody shooting at me. I had to avoid snakes and insects that might want to bite or sting or that kind of thing. But for the most part, it was pretty safe. So I stayed there, and I taught that for 3.5 years. But I had my first writing adventure down there, and it's strange because I didn't write any fiction for another 60 years. But anyway, that's a big skill. We had a base newspaper, and it was one of these weekly newspapers. And so the editor, he enlisted me, he barely knew me at that point, to write. It's nothing but a gossip column. You tell what's happening in your outfit, you know what the troops had been doing while we've been winning the basketball games. I love basketball, so that's what I played. But we had a lot of sports, so I just reported on that kind of thing. And the odd thing about it was I enjoyed it a lot. The editor said I was a good writer, and I was only 19 years old. He said, would you like to write for this paper if I could get you a transfer? And I said, sure, let's do it. So he said, well, you'll have to put in the request. So I put in the request, and my company commander, Captain Hughes, okayed it. I said, okay, looks like we're good. Of course, the base commander sent that up to Colonel Oberdorf, and I got a rather harsh response. He said that the government has spent a lot of money schooling Airman Johnston for survival training, to be a survival training instructor. And we need people doing that more than we need people writing gossip columns. Request denied. So that was that.
Wow.
The base commander wouldn't let me. And the funny thing is, Mike, he was one of my students. I mean, here I was. I only at that point had 1 stripe. I was enlisted, had 1 stripe, and here he was a colonel.
Right.
And but I was his jungle survival instructor. I said, well, this guy likes me. I did good. He wouldn't let me anyway. So I spent the rest of the time in survival training. I had one other interesting riding experience down there, though. Now, when I was there at this particular time, there were Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. There was about 8 or 10 different bases in the Panama Canal Zone. And so they had a service-wide short story contest. I said, well, I'll write a short story and enter in this contest. So I did. And I won second prize, $15. Big prize, $15. So, but I was pleased to win second prize. But the odd thing about that one is always, you say everybody has a story. There's always something. Well, many times there's a story behind the story. Anyhow, the guy that won first prize, he had just about served up his time. So like a month after that, he was back in the United States, and he had gotten discharged, and they found out that he had plagiarized his story. So I thought the judges would get back together, and say that Don Johnston won the contest. That never happened. It didn't happen. Anyhow, the truth is, though, when I left the Air Force, I did not write fiction for 60 years. Now, that's a long time. But after getting discharged from the Air Force, that would have been in September of 58. I did, in fact, go to college on the GI Bill. I went to a small state college, Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches. And there I studied biology and chemistry. So that's what my degree is in. I do believe that the butterfly effect was real.
I believe it was too. Can I ask just a couple of real quick questions?
Yeah, you jump in anytime. I don't want to talking.
Okay. But well, I love listening to you talk.
Feel free to
if it's okay, let's go back to your childhood. I think you answered this, but what was your favorite thing about growing up in Slocum?
Well, I lived close to some people. I didn't live in a town, but I had friends that I saw every day. And one time I said Slocum, that there was not much to do in Slocum. It was a big basketball town. Mike, those small towns up there in East Texas, though they may only have 200 people, they will, and they may only play basketball. They're not serious. We didn't have a football team.
Right.
But we often, with that little school, we were a Class B school. We could always beat all of the AA schools around us, and we would sometimes beat a AAA school. We played basketball 365 days a year. I said that the only things that we did in Slocum when I was growing up, I said we went to school, we went to church, and we played basketball. I said that was the three things we did. But I had a lot of friends that loved basketball, and we had my dad. I have pictures of my dad playing basketball. He loved it too when he was in school. But anyway, we had an outside court backboard my dad put up, but he was strict regulation on that. So there were always people at my house playing basketball, and so I love the friendship we had there. And I love the rural outdoors, and still do. But as I said, I had to leave to make a living. And after, the odd thing is, my wife and I thought we might. Well, I say thought we moved back up there in 1990, but we found that it was just the same, and we had changed.
Yeah.
We were used to the conveniences of the big city, and actually our best friends there, it was her cousin and a good friend of mine. They've been married for many, many years. They had lived in one county, Anderson County, all of their life. They had never lived in another place. So, and that was about the time, though, in 1990 when my son and daughter-in-law started having grandkids, and my wife and I looked at each other one day and said, we made a mistake. We need to go back to the Sugar Land area. And so we did. But we thought
to get back closer to the babies.
Yeah, that was it. The family drew us back. But that. I still say that's a beautiful place up there. And incidentally, I mentioned my wife, and she passed away about 10 years ago with cancer. So I am a widower living by myself. I have a lady friend that I see regularly, but we didn't get married or move in together. But we use the old high school term. We'll just be say we're going steady and let it
There
go.
you go. There you go.
But
Good for you. 88 and going steady, right?
yeah, we've been going steady for about 8 years. But anyway, when in college, now this is go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I
I just have a couple of questions. So
sure.
if we go back just a little bit, in growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Let's see. Well, one of them, believe it or not, was my school superintendent, but I would say my parents, particularly my dad. My dad, I was probably the biggest talker in the family, but he was a fairly silent man, but he was so honest and straightforward that people ask him opinion on many things, and he never sugarcoated anything. So, sometimes I tell a little white lie not to hurt somebody's feelings. For instance, one time it was his aunt, and his uncle had died, and his aunt was 80, and she was dating a guy, his name was Mr. Sullivan. And she asked my dad, says, what do you think about Mr. Sullivan? And he said, Mr. Sullivan is a good guy, but he is too old to get married. So that's what he told my aunt, and they got married, and then they got divorced. So I guess his advice was right. But
sounds like he was right on.
He was in that case, but that was the way he always was, and everybody knew my dad that way. He was a plain spoken person, and he was as honest as anybody I ever saw. Like I said, he wouldn't pull any punches. Even if it hurt my aunt's feelings, I'm sure, but he wanted to tell her the truth, and it would have been good advice.
Yeah, that's a good person to grow up with.
Yeah,
so in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Well, I ended up toward the math, but we didn't, and it was probably my weakest subject when in college. But we only had geometry, and we had plane geometry and algebra. And I tended toward the STEM subjects. I didn't even know what that meant when I was in school. Of course, that word hadn't been invented then. And we only had one. It was a very small school, and we only had one general science type of class. So I did not have much science, although that was what I liked. And then when I got to college, the thing about the math, though, it had been 4 years since I had studied anything like that, and I found college algebra to be the hardest subject I took. The biology and chemistry that I took, I ate those courses up. I made an A in every one of them. It was so easy for me, but I had to struggle a little bit in math. I was lucky, though. My brother, who's younger than me, since he didn't go into the service, he was 6 months ahead of me, 1 semester, not 6 months, a semester ahead of me in college. And then he and I roomed together for a year, but he was a math major. So a couple of times there, I'd have to ask him to help me with the problem. And he ended up teaching math. He finally got his master's degree in math, and he taught the gifted and talented advanced calculus. So I didn't take advanced calculus. I got right up to it, but then that was really more math than I ever actually used in my career, because as a chemist, I just needed to balance a few equations and things like that. So it was, I didn't use the math that I studied. I probably, first year algebra was all the math I ever used in my career as a chemist. And I worked as a bacteriologist too for 3 years before going to the chemistry.
Gotcha. So when you got into the Air Force, when you volunteered to be in the Air Force, did you have any influence on ending up at Panama Canal?
I did. I'm glad you asked, because it's a strange way. When I signed up in a little town of Palestine there, about 10 miles from my little town, then they sent me to Dallas, and you take all of these tests. They're aptitude tests, really. There were 8 of them, and I still don't understand their scoring system, but 8 is the highest grade you can make. You make from 1 to 8, and they tell you that the average is 4 and 5. I scored very high on all the tests. That was a good start. And when we went to tech school, that was at Chanute Air Force Base in the little town of Rantoul, Illinois. Oh no, it's after. I got to Rantoul too quick. After we got out of basic training, or as we were about to get out, we filled out a questionnaire, and some people doubted that they really meant it, but in my case, it seemed like it was real. So I said, I didn't know exactly. I didn't really know what survival training was. I said I wanted something where I could be outside a good while. And so they put me in survival training. So I got my request. And I also, to some degree, that's probably why I ended up in Panama. But I scored high on the things that I did in the service. And so they did give me some credit for my work. And so that's how I ended up down there in Panama.
So you chose Stephen F. Austin as a college?
I did because it was close to my home at the time. I was going back to live with my mother and daddy, and it was only 50 miles away.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so that was one of the reasons that I chose it. That was the main reason. I had actually visited when I was a senior in high school, but when I got back from the Air Force, I got married about a year later, but I'll tell you about that. Did I tell you this? I didn't tell you that I married a hometown girl.
No.
She was not my high school sweetheart because she was 4 grades below me. When I was graduating out of high school,
she was coming in.
She was coming in. That's it. She was just, I would have said a little kid, but when I got back 4 years later, she was a beautiful young lady. And it wasn't too long until we started dating, and we got married at the end of my freshman year. So we were in college together. She didn't finish college. She took some subjects, and she worked part-time. And I did too. I was a student lab instructor. I did that in several courses. So, but we got married at the end of my freshman year. And when I graduated, well, we came to Houston. In fact, that's back in the old days when the Houston Chronicle and other papers advertised the jobs, in the newspaper. And so,
there was a thing called help wanted ads in the classifieds.
That is it.
Yeah.
The really young people don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
but I saw one. In fact, I got it was Bayreuth, an oil field service company. I spoke of that, and they were advertising for a microbiologist, and so I had 3 courses in microbiology because I liked it so much. And I also was a lab instructor. That was really probably the thing that got the job for me because I took care of the stock room and prepared all the media and the stains and sterilized everything. So you could have had a degree in microbiology and you wouldn't have learned as much as you learned just working there. So
that practical knowledge probably helped.
It was very practical. I liked microbiology better than anything I ever did. But I went to work for this oil field service company. They had exactly 1 microbiologist, and they had about 35 chemists and engineers. And I got to looking around, and I said, well, if I stay here on this microbiology job, I don't think I got much chance of a promotion.
Yeah.
And so I finally, after about 2 or 3 years, I requested they let me move over into chemistry. And actually, when I left, I was a lab manager, so that was good.
There you go.
But
that worked out. So how long did you work for them?
I worked for one company, Bayreuth, 12 years, and I worked for another one for 3.5 years. Headhunters took me from the first job, and I went to work for the second company. And then at that time, when I started my own business, which we have sold, and my son ran it for years. I was more or less retired 10 years ago. I went to work with him every Monday so I could get him to buy my lunch, that kind of thing. But I didn't do much work. But anyhow, we just had the one child shortly after we moved to Houston. He was born, and he and my daughter-in-law live about 3 miles from me. In fact, I'm going over that. She cooks dinner every Tuesday night for me and for her father. Her father is also a widower. So Tuesday night is.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.